you, everybody, for coming to the College Football Betting with Aaron Torres YouTube channel. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of the screen. Go ahead, click that subscribe button. It helps our channel grow. It helps our audience grow. I appreciate it more than you know, as we're talking college football on this channel year-round. Appreciate your support. Click that subscribe button. You talk about the game with maybe the most at stake. Now, I'm not saying it's bigger than Georgia-Bama, but the game with the most at stake this weekend, I think you could argue, is Kansas State hosting Oklahoma State. Top 25 matchup in Manhattan, Kansas. And this is why I believe that there is more at stake in this game than any other one on the Week 5 college football slate. Bama, Georgia, doesn't matter what happens. Both are still very much in the college football playoff and even SEC title race. But Oklahoma State, Kansas State, I think we all kind of feel like the Big 12 is probably going to be a one-bid league. It is only going to be that automatic bid that qualifies for the 12-team college football playoff. Well, both of these teams came into the year believing they could be that team. Both of these teams coming off of an 0-1 start to Big 12 play. So let's go ahead and dive in, as Kansas State, as of Wednesday night when we're recording, is a 4.5-point favorite. The over-under set at 54.5. In terms of how both these teams got to 0-1, very different manners in which it happened, okay? Let's start with Kansas State. They go on the road last week at BYU. And this was the quintessential, just absurd college football game. I know we're new to the Big 12 After Dark era. This had some major Pac-12 After Dark vibes, okay? How about this? Kansas State jumps out to a 6-0 lead, under 4 minutes to go in the first half. From there, BYU kicks a field goal, makes it 6-3. Then, fumble recovery by BYU, return for a touchdown, 10-6 BYU. BYU scores off of another turnover before halftime. So 17 points in the final 3.5 minutes of the first half. Oh, by the way, they open the second half with a turnover that results in a touchdown. Then Kansas State finally doesn't turn the ball over, but instead punts it to BYU, who returns a punt for a touchdown. And so in real time, in about 8 minutes of real time, BYU puts up 31 unanswered points. I guess it would be 8 minutes of game time, not real time. 31 unanswered points. The game is essentially over from there. Kansas State ends up losing. Just a weird game. From Oklahoma State's perspective, their loss in their Big 12 opener was the exact opposite. They just got punked. They ironically were playing a team from Utah in their own right. They were facing Utah. But this was a bad loss for Oklahoma State. And I say this as a guy that picked Utah to win the Big 12. Because the bottom line is, first of all, Utah was without Cam Rising. This is why we totally stayed away from this game on last week's college football betting pod. Totally stayed away. No Cam Rising. Isaac Wilson, true freshman, walks into Stillwater and gets the dub. What's especially embarrassing, this game wasn't even really competitive for Oklahoma State. Don't let the final score fool you. The final score was 22-19. It was 22-3 entering the fourth quarter and well into the fourth quarter before Oklahoma State made a couple plays, made it competitive. Utah wins. Utah, obviously, look, they're another team that's a completely different conversation, but Utah's obviously in the driver's seat in the Big 12, but Oklahoma State lost that game, and it was embarrassing. And I think what has to be concerning for Oklahoma State, you have now played 2 Power 5 opponents. You played Arkansas a few weeks ago. You played Utah last week. And the issue is pretty straightforward in both of them. You could not run the ball against Arkansas and Utah, and you could not stop the run against those two teams, okay? So against Arkansas, 230 yards of total of rush offense given up by Oklahoma State. Arkansas did what they wanted on the ground. Is that a fluke? What does it mean? Well, Utah walks in and punks you even worse, 249 yards in your own building. But to make matters even worse than that is the fact that Oklahoma State, as you may remember, returned the leading rusher in college football in Ollie Gordon. He has won a 100-yard rushing game. That was in the opener against South Dakota State, a very good FCS program, but an FCS program nonetheless. In all 3 games outside the South Dakota State game, Ollie Gordon has not broken 50 yards rushing. And so when I look at this game, to me, I think the pick and the decision is actually pretty easy. I got Kansas State winning. I got Kansas State covering, okay? Bottom line is, look, Kansas State has not been great on the road. We just talked about the BYU game. We, oh, by the way, didn't even reference that a few weeks back they struggled at Tulane. But at the same time, Kansas State, you can go back to that BYU game and just say that was one of the weirdest games that anyone has ever been part of at any point in college football, okay? In that game for the Kansas State Wildcats, okay? Kansas State, first of all, they had the 3 turnovers, which we talked about. But even beyond the 3 turnovers, so 3 turnovers for them, none for BYU. BYU finished with under 250 yards of total offense. Kansas State had over 100 more yards of total offense than them. Kansas State converted converted more third downs. They converted 8 of 17 on third down, BYU just 3 of 9, and had more first downs overall than BYU. So I could go on and on. I'm not excusing the 3 turnovers, but on the road, at altitude, crazy place to play. Provo's a really tough place to play. I'm not excusing the loss, but you could see where things get weird, and it just feels like an outlier game where you're not going to have 3 turnovers that directly lead to scores. It doesn't feel like going forward, especially at home where, oh, by the way, you dominated Arizona 2 weeks ago. From the Oklahoma State perspective, listen, I know Mike Gundy always pulls a couple games out of his, where every year. And to his credit, his teams usually get better. But I just go back to what I said a minute ago, is when I look at this game, I think there are real issues with Oklahoma State coming into this game. Can't run the football. Can't stop the run. And that's where it becomes especially problematic against a Kansas State run offense, which even in the loss to BYU, moved the ball up and down on the ground. 228 yards rushing offense for Kansas State in that loss. Avery Johnson, listen, I don't love Avery Johnson as a passer, but as a runner, finished that game with 74 yards rushing, had 110 yards rushing the week before against Arizona. The dude makes plays with his feet. On top of that, Avery Johnson, DJ Giddens has been good all year long. They run the football really well. And to the credit of Kansas State, they stop the run as well. Top 15 nationally in run defense. So to me, it's pretty simple. Kansas State has been pretty good at home over the last couple of years. And I just think this is a styles make fights type games. We talked about it earlier with Alabama, Georgia. The style to me is advantageous to Kansas State. Kansas State is great running the ball, great stopping the run. Oklahoma State can't run the ball, can't stop the run. Feels pretty simple. I like Kansas State to win, Kansas State to cover. To me, I'm not even a huge Kansas State guy. They were one of my best bets on the under of 9.5 this year, but I don't know how you can't be excited. And frankly, it's one of my favorite bets of the week.